Resuming, this is chapter 2, different forms of class struggle. Section 3, class struggles and national struggles, genus and species. In addition to the direct exploitation of labor, condemning workers to present enslavement in any particular country, the poverty of philosophy, the Communist Manifesto, and contemporaneous texts denounce the exploitation of one nation by another, or the exploitation of some nations by others. In the case of Ireland, it must be remembered that the exploitation of this country was one of the main sources of Britain's material wealth. Was the exploitation that occurs in a single country the sole cause of class struggle? In the same year as the Communist Manifesto, Marx issues an authoritative warning. Those who cannot understand how one nation can grow rich at the expense of another were even less equipped to understand how in the same country one class can enrich itself at the expense of another. Far from being of minor relevance from the standpoint of class struggle, the exploitation and oppression that obtain internationally are a precondition, at least methodologically, for understanding social conflict and class struggle at a national level. As we know, along with the liberation or economic emancipation of the proletariat, Marx and Engels demanded the liberation or emancipation of oppressed nations. In the struggle for the liberation, emancipation of exploited class, a struggle, exploited class is a class struggle, but not the, sorry, I need to start from again. Is the struggle for liberation, emancipation of exploited classes a class struggle, but not the struggle for the liberation, emancipation of exploited and oppressed nations? Is the struggle whose protagonist is a class that has achieved its political emancipation, but not its economic and social emancipation, a class struggle, whereas the struggle waged by a nation yet to achieve its political emancipation is not a class struggle? Not having secured economic and social emancipation, the proletariat is currently subjected to enslavement. This is a phrase that immediately puts us in mind of slavery in the strict sense. And once again, the question is tabled. Is the struggle whose protagonists are subject to present enslavement, emancipated slavery, or wage slavery, to the indirect slavery of the white man in England, a class struggle, whereas the struggle whose protagonists are subject to real slavery, the direct slavery of the black man of the other side of the Atlantic, is not a class struggle? In the struggle whose subject is defined in the Grundrisse in an unusual phrase as free labor, a class struggle, whereas the struggle whose subjects, in the words of the German ideology, are the insurgent Negroes of Haiti and the fugitive Negro slaves of all the colonies, is not? Take the terms in which Marx condemns bourgeois society. First of all, let us attend to the poverty of philosophy. Quote, modern nations have been able only to disguise slavery in their own countries, but they have imposed it without disguise upon the New World. Unquote. Some years later, with the colonial rule imposed on India by Britain in mind, Marx reiterated the profound hypocrisy and inherent barbarism of bourgeois civilization lies unveiled before our eyes, turning from its home, where it assumes respectable forms, to the colonies, where it goes naked. End quote. Is it only the struggle challenging mass slavery and camouflage barbarism that is tantamount to class struggle? I think it would be absurd to answer in the affirmative and decline to apply the category of class struggle precisely where exploitation and oppression are most overt and brutal. Let us return to Langet's testimony. Having referred to Marx's interest in and passion for the movements of oppressed nationalities, he continued, quote, his philosophy was not casuistry. He would never have taken refuge in an unambiguous quibbling when the clear, frank theory of class struggle was at stake, end quote. And the nexus between national struggles and class struggles is clear. Is this interpretation correct? In 1849, in Wage, Labor, and Capital, Marx investigated the economic relations which constitute the material foundation of the present class struggles and national struggles, and stated his intention to trace the class struggle in current history. Judging from this passage, it would seem that national struggles are to be subsumed under the category of class struggle, broadly construed. Comparison with another passage from the aforementioned letters of April 1870, where Marx proceeds to a more in-depth analysis of the Irish question, is in order. Let us read the conclusion. Quote, in Ireland, the land question has so far been the exclusive form of the social question. It is a question of existence, a question of life or death for the immense majority of the Irish people. At the same time, it is inseparable from the national question. End quote. In Ireland, there was no social question apart from the national question. A de facto identity existed between the two, at least for a whole historical period, as long as independence had not been gained. The social question is the more general category here, the genus, which, in the concrete situation of the unhappy island exploited and oppressed by Britain for centuries, take the specific form of the national question. For anyone who has not grasped the point, Marx reiterates it. The social significance of the Irish question should never be lost from view. The species cannot be understood if it is detached from the genus. We can argue similarly in connection with the passage from Wage Labor and Capital referring to class struggle and national struggles. Class struggle is the genus in which determinate circumstances takes the specific form of national struggle. If classes and class struggle are formed and developed on the material base of the production and distribution of the resources and means that ensure life on the basis of social relations and actual relations of life, it is clear that we must bear in mind the division of labor, not only nationally, but also internationally, never losing sight of the world market. For people stripped of their independence, and especially for people subject to colonial rule and despoliation, the existing order reserves a particularly revolting division of labor. In the colonies, observed Marx in summer of 1853 with reference to India, capitalism drags individuals and people through blood and dirt, through misery and degradation. We know that Ireland too was a colony, and in it, there was not a trace of the English citizen, so-called freedom. In no other country have I seen so many gendarmes. Gendarmes? To be precise, Marx went further in an article of January 1859. What was involved was oppression, evincing genocidal tendencies. Quote, the British landlords of Ireland are federated for a fiendish war of extermination against the coders, or, as they call it, they combine for the economical experiment of clearing the land of useless mouths, end quote. Wow, that's very relevant today. The specific difference that characterized the social question and class struggle in the colonies by comparison with the capitalist metropolis has to be registered. There, the international division of labor converted the subject peoples into a mass of serfs or slaves over whom the facto power of life and death could be wielded. Secondly, the victim of this condition was a whole people, the nation as such. Hence, Britain, the country that had hitherto ruled the world market, imposed slavery on Ireland, and represented the dominant nation, was one thing. Ireland, reduced to simple pasture land to provide meat and wool at the cheapest possible price for the English market, and whose population had been drastically reduced through eviction and forced emigration, was quite another. Perhaps the meaning of the expression class struggles used in the Communist Manifesto is now becoming clear. Class struggles. The plural is not employed to denote repetition of the identical, the continual recurrence of the same class struggle in the same form. It refers to the multiplicity of shapes and forms that class struggle can assume. We may conclude on this point. Marx did not define the relationship between class struggle and national struggle, social question and national question clearly and unequivocally, and only in fits and starts did he arrive at the more mature formulation which distinguishes between genus and species. but the interest and passion with which he followed the movements of oppressed nationalities were an expression not of distraction from the class struggle and social question, but of an attempt to grasp their concrete manifestations. Oppressed nations are summoned to be the protagonists of the second great class struggle for emancipation.